All right, so the idea here is to explain a little bit about how this whole mountain rescue machine works. What keeps it ticking? How does it run? We start off with the Mountain Club of South Africa, which is a sports club. And a small group of the people within the Mountain Club have decided that they'd like to find some socially redeeming way of using their skills. We're also looking for a good reason not to spend a day in the office. And there's nothing like a rescue call-out to fix that for you very, very quickly. Throughout the 13 sections of the Mountain Club of South Africa, one of which, for weird reasons, is actually based in Namibia, we have 6 rescue teams. And if you look at the slide, you'll see that there are a bunch of little yellow dots. What you'll see from that is that there are not a lot of rescue teams up in this part of the world. So where do we get these guys from? We start off trawling through the recreational outdoors people. We'll look for hikers, we'll look for climbers, we'll look for adventure racers, people who are comfortable being outdoors. One of our big philosophies is you can't look after other people in the mountains if you can't look after yourself. And there are times when you will find yourself unexpectedly out on your own. It does happen. So having people like hikers, climbers, makes life a lot easier. We can put them out there. They should be able to look after themselves, and they are normally also fairly switched on when it comes to looking after themselves at height. We then start off and assume a clean slate, start teaching them a little bit of rope work. It's surprising how bad some climbers can be with their knots, so we have to sort of retrain them from scratch. We'll take it a little bit further. We start working with stretcher work. We start playing around in the mountains. We'll run a lot of scenarios, teaching them how things work in the real world. Basically, context-sensitive training. The big trick is just to get them exposed to as much as possible. It takes a long time for somebody to get involved, and that's one of the biggest issues we have. It requires long-term commitment. We get a lot of guys who come in the door, they want to get involved, and 6 months down the line, they're no closer to being ready for call-out than they were 6 months ago. For most people, it's anything up to a year-long process before we say, okay, we're happy letting you out under supervision. We also teach them the basics of being safe around helicopters, how to avoid being the cause of the crash. And then we start getting a little bit more interesting in terms of the skills. So we'll do a bit of kloofing rescue. Great fun that. You've got a river that you can't run away from, and then you start tying ropes and things like that around it as well. You expect, or you learn very quickly to cope with being very cold for very long periods of time. This particular one comes from a Kaiman's River exercise down in the Southern Cape, where if you're from up here, you're used to these lovely clear streams. And then you go down there and they've got Coca-Cola flowing in all the rivers. It's just weird. The other skills that we teach them will be things like pyrotechnics, the skills that you won't use every single day, but where you can potentially still cock it up quite badly. There's nothing like throwing a smoke grenade and then discovering that you've now got to put out the fire as well. These things get really hot really quickly, so you'll note that there's a fire extinguisher in the foreground. The other fun game is the good old whodunit, or where are they, called search planning and management, where we'll teach guys how to take the information that comes in, how to look for other information, and how to plan a search in the hope that you will find somebody. Most of the time we're fairly fortunate and we get it right, and occasionally we're not fortunate and we don't get it right. The latest skill that we've had to add to our little repertoire is helicopter water rescue, which seems a bit weird for a mountain rescue team, but what's happened is that the Air Force seems to have decided that they're happier having trained people doing the live bait thing on the end of the hoist than less trained people doing it if there does happen to be a flash flood of some sort. So one of my freakiest experiences has been sitting in the back of a helicopter wearing a wetsuit 10 o'clock at night over Soweto. So let's talk about the people that call us out. The most common crowd are the hikers. But here's your surprise fact of the night. I took a look at our stats yesterday. Aviation is our second biggest customer base over the last 5 years. And you will see that they have a habit of parking aircraft in some really interesting places. Unfortunately, the aircraft is very often not reusable after that. The other crowd that's related to aviation is we'll sometimes help out the Civil Aviation Authority. If they need to get to a crash site where they need to be looked after, they will ask us to help them out, provide them with a little bit of safety, get them to the aircraft wreck so that they can try and work out what went wrong. Occasionally they'll look at the wreck and just say, forget it. That is just too unsafe. You guys bring us what you can and we'll work it out from there. Of course, rock climbers are also a customer base. Thank you, guys. The climbing community is probably the one that gets the worst deal because everybody seems to think that mountain rescue is there to go and rescue rock climbers. We rescue a lot less rock climbers than other people. We also get some fairly weird and wonderful calls. This happens to be Hartbeespoort Cableway. Not the current one. This photo was taken about 6 or 7 years ago. We got a call one night to say, the cableway is ground to a halt and we've got a couple of gondolas hanging up there. Can you please help us? The other one that we've had that was also a little bit weird was a quad biker who managed to disappear on the outskirts of Pretoria. When we eventually found him, it turned out that he'd driven his quad bike at speed into a ditch and spent the night unconscious in the ditch. A full 15 meters away from a tarred road. Mountain rescue, wilderness people. Sadly, there's also a downside to what we do. Some of the people that we go out and look for don't make it, either because they've had a bad day out or because that was their intention in the first place. It does mean that there is a downside, there is some fairly interesting psychological impact that you can have. So what is the cost of all of this? Who pays for it? The state pays. Mountain rescue is a free and voluntary service. The volunteers themselves don't get paid, they don't get subsidized, they don't get any assistance as far as purchasing equipment is concerned, other than the occasional professional deal. The state, in turn, provides the aircraft. We get to train with them, and occasionally we get to pay the piper and go and do something really exciting at the taxpayer's expense. So how do we avoid coming home in the newspapers? Some very basic rules. First one is, please tell someone where you're going. It's a lot easier to look for you if we know where to start. And the second is plan for an emergency. Simple stuff. Take a headlamp, take some extra food, take some water, and take your phone. Don't rely on it, but take it. It might actually make life a lot easier for you. Thank you.